of taking a look at something that the story that you're really familiar with, and you're probably wondering, why on earth are we going there? But I'll tell you why, okay? So as I've been studying over the last few weeks, I was looking at the story of Noah. And he built the ark, right? You guys know the story? Noah built the ark before the flood, saved humanity and animals, all of that, right? After God destroyed the earth at the beginning. Probably a lesson that you've learned since childhood if you were raised in a faith belief at all. This has Christian foundations. And it's a really common story. But what I find amazing about the Bible is that every time you read it, you pick up something new. It's as if God says, oh, hey, you're going through this right now. Let me teach you something new, right? Do you guys have that experience ever, right? So we're going to hang out in Genesis chapter 6, which is where this story of Noah unfolds. Genesis chapter 6 and chapter 7. We'll be there for a bit, and we'll do some other verses as well. I do have to make a little bit of a disclaimer. I am going to be sharing some things that I want to make you think. Okay, so I'm not going to give you all the answers. I'm expecting you to think about how what I'm saying about Noah may tie to your life today, all right? And God gets to impress upon you what of that he wants you to know. So that's where we're going to start. Now, by way of introduction, and by the way, I have a lot of pieces of paper. It's because they're large print and double-spaced. And trust me, 30 minutes max, and you won't have to listen to me anymore. But by way of introduction, how many of you guys believe that we live right now at the end of time and that Jesus is coming very soon? Okay, I believe that too. So, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I need to tie together the time that we're living in with the time that Noah lived in so that you see where I'm going with this whole talk, all right? So we're going to review a couple texts briefly, and I'm going to try to get to do this without going too far. So let's start with Matthew 24, 37 to 39. And this says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Now, in general, is there a problem with eating and drinking and getting married and those kind of things? There's not, right? There's no problem with that. So when this Bible text is given, it means there must be something deeper that we need to look at. There must be something else that's going on that really led these people in Noah's time to ignore the warnings of Noah, right? And and others that were preaching at that time as well. And things then that made their daily activities of life kind of just showed their lack of understanding of what was going on, right? And their unwillingness to hear the warning that God was giving them. So now let's go get over there in Genesis chapter 6. And again, I'm going to skip through some of the verses. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And we're going to start actually in verse 5. So Genesis 6, verse 5. And this says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Okay, that goes a little bit deeper, doesn't it, in explaining what times were like back then. And then if you jump down to verse 11, chapter 6, still verse 11, it says that the earth was also corrupt before God, and it was filled with what? Violence. And who was causing this violence? In verse 13, it tells us what? The earth was filled with violence through whom? Through the people. Okay? Wait, do any of those definitions sound like what we're living in today by any chance? It sounds a little familiar, right? Have you turned on the news lately? I mean, the violence is crazy. Other things that are going on are a little crazy. There's a lot of wickedness we read about or hear about, right? Okay, so sounding familiar. All right, then Ellen G. White makes this statement. Again, we're just kind of developing to see what was really going on besides their eating and drinking. And this is what she says. She says, they sought only to gratify the desires of their own proud hearts and reveled in scenes of pleasure and wickedness, not desiring to retain God in their knowledge. They soon came to deny his existence. Does that sound familiar? They glorified human genius. They worshiped the works of their own hands and taught their children to bow down to graven images. Men put God out of their knowledge and worshiped the creatures of their own imagination, and as a result, they became more debased. So as they completely forgot about God and started worshiping the things that they created, they just became more and more wicked and evil. Okay. So we know that if we look at our headlines today, would you say that we live in a corrupt world? Would you say that there's a lot of violence? There is, right? So I'm tying back this whole talk of what Noah was doing prior to the flood and what we're doing now. Because as we read in our very first verse in Matthew, so as it was in the times of Noah, it will be now, right? So let's make those connections. Let's go look at a few more verses here in Genesis, and what I want to look at now is what was Noah really like? So in verse 8, it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then in verse 9, it says, Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations, and Noah did what? He walked with God. What does it mean to walk with God? And you guys who did song service this morning under Charlie's leadership, thank you so much for that song. Because what does Micah 6:8 tell us? That God has shown us what is good. And what is that? That we do justly, we love mercy, and we walk humbly with God, right? Well, we'll get into walking with God in a little bit more detail later, but for right now, because of who Noah was and because of his character, God does something pretty miraculous. So let's keep going. And we're going to see that in verse 13, God talks to Noah, right? And he tells him something. So basically, God says to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Wow. So God here is telling Noah what's going to happen in the future, right? But he's doing more than that as well, because if we then move on to verse 14, which we'll get to in just a second, he also tells Noah what he needs to do to survive the storm that's coming, right? So God doesn't just say, hey, this is going to happen. He tells Noah, this is what you got to do. Does that sound familiar? Do we have guidance today for what's going to happen during the times we live in and then what we need to do? We do. So what does verse 14 say? Make yourself what? An ark. Okay, so very clearly, he's telling Noah what he needs to do. But what's interesting here is, did he tell Noah that he would do it for him? No, he doesn't say that, right? He doesn't say, I'm going to make the ark for you. He actually wants Noah deeply involved in this work. He wants him in the middle of this ark-making adventure. We might have an adventure to get into, too. Okay. So let's pause a second, and we're going to look at this word make. So the word make. In Hebrew, and I love Hebrew because, like English, and even more so, it always has more than one meaning. So it is a verb, could be an action verb, right? And it means, can be used as to commit or to execute, to prepare, to work, to accomplish, or to act with effect, right? So you're going to make something. Now, in our modern English, we don't usually say, you need to make an ark, or you need to go make your house. If I'm building a house, I don't say, right, Charlie? We don't usually say, I'm making a house. In English, we use the term build. And that's a really smart word to use in a sense because it actually is a synonym for the word make. Okay? I will say, though, since it is this time of year, the only house I might make would be a gingerbread house. But I'm not going to build or make a real house. I'm going to build it, right? Okay. So check this out. What does it mean to build something? Has really two basic meanings: to construct something by putting parts together, or material together, or to make stronger or more intense. All right, so when we're building something, do we have to do that? Mike, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to add something. Noah told his sons, go for wood.
Go for wood, yes it is. There you go, go for wood versus go for wood. Okay, I like that. All right, so let's go back then to chapter 6. And you guys, this is just the introduction, okay, so we're getting there. In chapter 6, it continues with the very clear instructions for how to build the ark, right? And then you get all the way down to verse 22. And it says this: thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. How much did Noah do? All. According to what? What God commanded him. Okay. And then actually, if you go down further and you get over into chapter 7, which we will in a little bit, but Genesis 7:5 basically repeats the same thing. It says, and Noah did according to what? All that the Lord commanded him. Do you think there's a message there? Do you think maybe that God is giving us a chance here to say, but I think I should do it this way? I know you said to do it that way, God, but I want to do it this way. Do you think that would have gone well for Noah? Probably not, right? Okay. So, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. When you read this twice, do you think that these two verses together show that obedience is important to God? That when he repeats something, he's telling us that it's important? All right. So we're going to keep going briefly through this, and we're going to look at what the outcome of Noah's following God is at this point. So if we look at verse 16, it says, so those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded him, and what happened? And the Lord shut him in. Okay. And the Lord shut him in. Do you think that was a good thing? Have any of you guys ever been on a roller coaster? I haven't done this for a lot of years, but I can remember having moments of panic, you know, when you're going up the hill on the roller coaster and wondering if the bar is going to hold. Like, did you ever used to just have that thought of, what if this bar breaks loose? I'm going to come out, right? And I wonder if Noah, when God had sent his angels to shut that door, thought, phew, okay, I'm safe, right? It relieves that sense of stress that we have. And then, down in chapter 7, verse 23, you read here, not only that, it says that only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. Do you think that there are benefits to following God's commands? Are there benefits to doing what he tells us to do? I don't think that God really commands us to do frivolous things. I don't know about you, but I know who I am, and I don't always like being told what to do, right? It's just not in my nature. And sometimes we fight harder than other times against it, being told what to do. But if the person telling you what to do is someone that loves you deeply, and you know that they're really telling you that for your own good, it's a little bit easier to be willing to do it, right? Okay. Judging from this story, just from this one story, and there are plenty more in the Bible, they make a very clear point about the benefits to us from obeying God and what he says in his word. In fact, I would say that our lives depend upon it. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right, we're done with our review. Now we're ready to get to the points for today, the meat of our study, and we will start off with our Hebrews 11:7, our verse for today. So what does this say? By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Okay. So, in this verse alone and in the story of Noah, I actually found 8 key takeaway points. You might find more or less. I don't think it really matters. The point that I want from you today is I want you to think about looking deeper at this story and trying to see what message in it God has for you, okay? These things that I see in the story of Noah building the ark, they give us examples of how we could live now, right? Or perhaps another way to say it would be that it tells us what materials we might need as we build our arks. Hence the title of my sermon, Build Your Ark, right? See, I do tie things together, right? So let's look at these 8 things together. Number 1, Noah had a relationship with God and he walked with God. And that's evident from Genesis 6:9. How did he do that? And I love this Ellen White quote down here from the Testimonies, Volume 5. It says, I wish I could impress upon every worker in God's cause the great need of, what? Continual and earnest prayer. They cannot constantly be on their knees, but they can be uplifting their hearts to God. This is how Enoch walked with God. This is how Noah walked with God. This is how who else walks with God? Us. We walk with God, right? Through prayer and Bible study. What is then the first thing that we read in that verse? Moving on to number 2. The very first thing we read in our verse for today, Hebrews 11:7 said what? Noah by what? By faith. So number 2, Noah had faith. And Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And then Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him earnestly. Make sense? So the Bible's telling us Jesus and God, they want us to have some faith, right? And Noah had it. All right, another tool in our tool belt. But let's define faith. In the Bible dictionary, it says that faith is the conviction of the truth. By the way, what is conviction? You know? It's a firmly held belief. Consciousness, a choice to believe something, right? So it's a conviction of the truth. It's a conviction or a belief regarding man's relationship with God and divine things, and conviction that God what? Exists. That's like our previous Bible verse, right? In Hebrews 11, where it said you can't have faith if you don't believe in God, right? And that he is the creator and ruler of all things and the provider and bestower of eternal salvation through Christ. I like this definition, this Bible definition, but there's one that I like as much, if not more. And believe it or not, I got this definition off of the Billy Graham Association website. Because when I read it, I thought, I like this. And basically, it says faith simply means believing that something is true and then committing our lives to it. So really, faith is two things. It's not one, right? The first one is that intellectual assent. In other words, you believe mentally. You're believing in your thought processes that God exists and that he loves us and that what Christ has done for us is for our salvation. But then there's a second part, and that's a commitment to him or a loyalty to God, and that is a definite decision, not only to believe with our minds, but to trust fully that, what? Christ is our salvation, and that we trust him with our lives. Do you see how that works? It gets a little bigger, right? Okay, now, so we're moving on to number 3, but I have to tell you that number 2, which was what? He had faith. And number 3 and number 4 tie together really closely. But let's see what number 3 is. Noah listened to God. What did God give Noah? What did he tell him? He told him to build the ark. Why? There was a flood coming, right? So he gave him the information, a prophecy really about a coming flood. Did Noah listen? How do we know he listened? Because he obeyed and he did something about it, right? So he did listen. Question, has God given us prophecies for today? To know what's going to happen? To know how to be ready? He has, hasn't he? Which books of the Bible, you guys? I know you know this. There's two main books of the Bible that talk about prophecy. What are they? Daniel and Revelation. And then we have Ellen White writings, and she prophesies through many books, but just name one of her books that's all about this. The what? The Great Controversy, Last Day Events, all of those. So there's even more information to allow us to dig more deeply into what God is telling us is going to happen right now in the time we live before Jesus comes back. Here's my question. Are we listening? Are you listening? Or are we like those people that Ezekiel talked about who have ears to hear, but do not hear because of their rebellion? Listening. Pretty important, right? Okay, so you move on to the next one. Number 4, again, ties right in with the 2 previous ones. Noah believed what God said. You know, the things that God told him about the flood, water coming from the sky, that had never happened before. The earth had been watered by dew. Nobody knew what rain was before the flood, right? And, you know, the scientists of the day said, there's no way. There's no way this can happen. There's no way a flood can come over the entire earth, right? But what Noah did know was that he knew God, and he trusted what God told him, right? And Ellen White says here that while Noah was giving his warning message to the world, his works testified of his sincerity. It was thus that his faith was perfected and made evident. And then she says he gave the world what? An example of believing just what God says. I'm going to summarize that. He believed and he did. Right? He believed it and he took action. Pretty simple. So we also have been warned about things that are coming. But do we see a lot of people not believing today? There's a lot of different ways to not believe, right? Sometimes people are, they just don't believe in God. They don't believe in the Bible. They believe that, sure, God is real and there is a Bible, but he would never destroy all the people on the earth or the whole earth, right? That it doesn't matter how bad you are, you're still going to go to heaven, right? There's a lot of beliefs out there. And then one of the ones that I heard that was most interesting, and I heard this from a fellow believer, who basically said, yeah, but, because I was talking about how the times we live in are very clearly the end times, right? And they said, yeah, but, there's always been wars and rumors of wars. Remember in Matthew 24 when Jesus gives those signs of things that are going to happen? What was it? It was wars, rumors of wars, keep going, violence, pestilence. There's all these things. And so we were talking about that, and their response to me was, yeah, but. That's always been happening. The only difference between then and now is that we have the internet. So you get the information super fast. So before, we wouldn't know that there were all of these natural disasters happening all over the world, the worst disasters that have ever been, because it would have taken too long for the news to come. Do you believe that? Or do you believe what God says? Right? God says we are living in the end times, and things are going to get worse, right? So, number 5. Oh, this is a heavy one. Let's do this. Noah takes action, which means that he obeys, and he builds the ark, to the exact specifications that God gave him. Ellen White says here that God gave Noah the exact dimensions of the ark and explicit directions in regard to his construction in every particular. I'm going to stop there for a second. Did Noah deviate from what God told him? Did he think, you know what, gopher wood? You know, I think pine. Redwood. Redwood would be better, and it would smell so nice. And cheaper, too, right? No, he was not questioning what God said. He just straight up believed him, right? And he went with it and was all in. Human wisdom could not have devised a structure of such great strength and durability. God was the designer, and Noah was the master builder. All that man could do was done to render the work perfect. And yet the ark, what? Could not of itself have withstood the storm to come upon the earth. So as much as Noah did, following all the rules, that still wasn't enough, right? What was required? What was required was God alone could preserve his servants upon the tempestuous waters. Interesting. Obedience. Let's look at a couple verses, shall we? Jeremiah 7:23 says, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people, and walk in, how many? All the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well with you. Was it well with Noah that he obeyed? Certainly was, wasn't it? I didn't put it on a slide, but I want to read you. Ellen White in Heavenly Places makes this statement. I love this. The Lord has determined that every soul who obeys his word shall have his joy, his peace, and his continual keeping power. Oh, if you want God's joy and peace, what do we need to do? We got to do what he asks us to do, right? But then you look at Philippians 2:13, and it tells us that we can't do it on our own. Just like Noah building that boat couldn't really save everything in the boat, it needed God's presence, right? So in Philippians 2:13 it says, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to do for his good pleasure. What does that mean? Somebody want to translate that in modern English for me? Sometimes it takes God to help us to even be willing to do what he wants us to do. And you know, that's a legitimate prayer. You can say that, right? Lord, make me willing. Because right now I'm not. And you know what? He will do it for you. Okay, and then the last one, Revelation 14:12. Here we come to the end of time where we're living, and it says, and here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Okay, just as God helped Noah to build the ark, he will help us as well, right? James 2:22, which I did not put on a slide, also because I added it this morning, sorry, also says, do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works, faith was made perfect. So when you read that very first, way back at the beginning when we read about Noah, and it said, it was in verse, 9, I believe, where it said, Noah was perfect, a just man and perfect in his generation. And you think to yourself, how could he have been perfect? It kind of tells you right here, right? That he was made perfect, his faith was made perfect because he was obeying God and doing what God had asked him to do, right? Kind of answers that question. Faith and obedience. Two main keys to building a really sturdy ark that will withstand the storm. Okay, let's keep going. We're on number 6. Number 6, Noah was all in. Yep. All that he possessed, he invested in the ark. Even though, what happened? The world made merry, or which is really saying the world made fun of him, guys. The world made merry at the folly of the deluded old man. Instead of humbling their heart before God, they continued their disobedience and wickedness, as though God had not spoken to them through his servant. Isn't that interesting? And then it says that many at first appeared to receive the warning, and yet they did not turn to God with true repentance. They were unwilling to renounce their sin. And then I threw in here this verse from 1 John 2:15, where it says, do not love the world. Why? Because the world's passing away. That's why. But he who does the will of God will abide, how long? Forever. Okay, so it's important to follow God, isn't it? Sorry, looking at my notes. For 120 years, it took Noah to build that ark. 120. 120 years to build this massive structure. Oh, by the way, he built it on dry land, remember? And there was no water anywhere. And he was being ridiculed the whole time, being called a fanatic and other things. Some fun fact I wanted you to know, though. The ark. Do you know how big it was? It was 510 feet long. If you don't know how long that is, judge it. It's 1.5 or 1.5 football fields in length. 1.5 football fields. Oh, and how tall was it? Guess what? Taller than a modern 4-story building. Okay? Kind of puts it into perspective. This is a big boat, right? And its cargo space, they estimate that you could fit 450 standard-sized semi-trailers into this ark. That's the size that they think that it could hold. 450 of those. And that in each trailer, each one of those trailers right now today that size, you could put 250 sheep. Okay, so 250 sheep times 450. Anyway, their estimates are that the ark could hold at a minimum 112,500 sheep. Just sheep. Okay, so do you think that God got people's attention by having Noah build an ark on dry land that was that big? People came from all over to see this, and while they were seeing it, what was Noah doing besides building the ark? He was preaching, he was warning them, he was telling them what they needed to do to be ready for this event that was coming. But somewhat like today, great men and worldly, honored, and wise men would say things like, oh, threatening about God. He's just trying to intimidate us. This will never happen. Don't be alarmed, right? Even if such a destruction were to take place of the world, God would never punish all of the human beings that he created. You just be at peace. Don't be afraid. Noah is a wild fanatic. Hear anything like that today in our world? Some of those things we hear, don't we? All right. So now we're going to move forward to number 7. During all of this, while he's building this, Noah does what? He stands firm and he stays focused. But how can you do that, man? There's so much going on. Like today, how can we stay firm? How can we stay focused on doing what God wants us to do? There's just so much to do. And then you add in the internet and Netflix and everything else, and it's so easy to get distracted, right? So, but Noah stood firm. How did he stand firm? He stood firm by keeping his connection with God close. Here, Ellen White says in Patriarchs and Prophets, but Noah stood like a rock amid the tempest. Surrounded by popular contempt and ridicule, he distinguished himself by his holy integrity and unwavering faithfulness. A power attended his words, for it was the voice of God to man through his servant. Okay, I have a question for you all now. So he's going through this time. He's following God. It's not easy, right? He's building this huge ark. He has some help, I'm sure. He's being ridiculed and called names and whatever, told how wrong he is. But you know what it doesn't say he did? It doesn't say he got angry. Oh, wait a minute. In today's culture, when you disagree with somebody, do you get angry sometimes? If we look at the media right now, what's going on? Are people wanting to debate? And by debating their position, I don't mean they're being nice to each other, right? He didn't fight. In fact, it doesn't even say that there were any angry words or he wasn't calling people names. Right? Sorry, I just have to tie that in because it irritates me. Okay, when politicians get going. Instead, though, he stayed very focused on what God wanted him to do, didn't he? Right? And if we look at how he did that, we see in 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has given us, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of what? But of power and of love and of a sound mind. Do you think it bugged Noah that people were calling him a crazy old man? I don't think so. He knew who he was, and he knew as God's child who he was, right? Connection with God made him strong in the strength of infinite power. While for 120 years his solemn voice fell upon the ears of that generation in regard to events which, so far as human wisdom could judge, were impossible. That's how he did it. That's how he stood firm. He stayed connected to God. And then it says in Genesis 7:5, what? And Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. After this, or shortly before this, God tells Noah to go ahead and enter the ark. In chapter 6 of this story, you look at the judgment of God, and then Noah's building the ark. When you get to chapter 7, it starts with, okay, let's load it up. We need the animals. And the animals were coming 2 by 2 and 7 by 7, right? Wouldn't you think if you saw that all of these animals are marching and flying and coming into this huge, wouldn't that make you ponder what was really going on? Maybe get your attention, right? But it didn't even change their heart. This is a huge miracle happening right in front of people, and it didn't change their heart. And then finally, as we go further into into Genesis 7, we'll get to verse 16, where it says that they entered the ark, right? They entered the ark, male and female, all the flesh went in as God had commanded them, and the Lord shut him in. We read that before, remember? Okay. I put as the title of number 8 that Noah was sealed in safety. And this is why. Ellen White says that the massive door, which it was impossible for those within to close, was slowly swung into its place by unseen hands. Noah was shut in. Remember our analogy? When that guy comes on the roller coaster and checks and just makes sure that bar is actually locked? Okay, I might be willing to go on it, right? And then it says, and the rejectors of God's mercy were shut out. There's a key word in that sentence for me. It's rejected, but what did they reject? They rejected God's mercy, not just God. They rejected his mercy. God doesn't force us to believe in him or to follow him, does he? But rejecting his mercy shuts us out, right? And then it says, the seal of heaven was on that door. God had shut it. And who could open it? God alone could open it. All right, you guys. Where else in the Bible do we read something about God placing a seal? On our foreheads. In what book? Revelation. Chapter 7, verse 3, Ezekiel. There's many of them. I picked this one. Revelation 7:3. Do not harm the earth. This is when God is talking to the angels. The sea or the trees, till what? Till we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. Why are we to be sealed? To keep our connection with God. Why else? For our safety and our protection. So God's going to make sure that we are protected, right, as we keep our connection with him. Just as God kept Noah safe and helped him build an ark to be ready for the storm and the flood that he went through, and then sealed him safely inside, God will do the same for us. Do you believe that? Okay. That's my 8 points, by the way. So in conclusion, one thing is very clear, that the construction of Noah's ark for his safe passage through the terrible storm and flood was only completed through God's guidance and his power. Noah and the ark and those in the ark were saved by God through faith and obedience. The same is true for us right now, isn't it? And our arks that we're building. Okay, this is our deep dive into Noah. Isn't it amazing that in a little story that we all have read 100 times, we could stop and pause and get so much more out of 1.5 chapters of the Bible, right? I hope you've enjoyed this. I really hope that it causes you to think about how you're building your ark and whether or not it will withstand the storm. So I'd like to leave you with a promise. Okay, this always happens too. It's the end of the sermon. My voice gets all shaky. So let's look at this promise. Build your ark. How? How do you build your ark, you guys? Read this with me. Zechariah 4:6. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Thank you for participating in today's sermon. And I hope this gives you some food for thought as we move forward. I believe we have our closing song now.
Let's all stand. Lift up the trumpet and loud let it ring. Jesus is coming again. Cheer up, ye pilgrims, be joyful and sing. Jesus is coming again. Coming again, coming again. Jesus is coming again.
Echo it hilltops, proclaim it ye plains, Jesus is coming again. Coming in glory, the Lamb that was slain, Jesus is coming again. Coming again, coming again, Jesus is coming again. Heaven's tell the master for Jesus again. Tempests and whirlwinds, the anthem prolong, Jesus is coming again. Coming again, coming again, Jesus is coming again. Nations are angry, by this we do know, Jesus is coming again. Knowledge increases, men run to and fro, Jesus is coming again. Coming again, coming again, Jesus is coming again.
Amen. Okay, we'll see if I can do it. Dear Heavenly Father, you alone are able to strengthen us to weather these storms.